Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had always been different from other women her age. While her college friends were planning weekend parties and discussing their latest dating adventures, Sarah was completing one of the most grueling military training programs in the world. At 26, she had already earned her place among the elite Navy SEALs, becoming one of only a handful of women to achieve this prestigious rank. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Naval Base Coronado. Sarah woke up at 0500 hours, completed her daily physical training routine, and prepared for another day of intense military operations. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her boots polished to a mirror shine, and her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Despite her petite frame of 5 feet 4 inches, Sarah commanded respect through her unwavering determination and exceptional skills. As she walked through the base corridors toward the main cafeteria, Sarah noticed the usual mixture of curious glances and respectful nods from fellow service members. Being a female SEAL still drew attention, even though she had proven herself countless times in training exercises and real combat situations. She had learned to ignore the whispers and focus on her duties, knowing that her actions spoke louder than any words. The cafeteria was bustling with activity when Sarah entered at 0730 hours. Marines, sailors, and various support staff filled the long tables, creating a symphony of conversations about upcoming missions, family updates, and military life. Sarah grabbed a standard breakfast tray and moved through the serving line, selecting scrambled eggs, toast, and black coffee. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, reflecting years of military training. She spotted an empty table near the large windows overlooking the training grounds and made her way over. As she sat down and began eating, Sarah reviewed her mental checklist for the day ahead. There was weapons training at 0900, followed by tactical planning sessions, and then underwater demolition practice in the afternoon. Her schedule was packed, but she thrived on the constant challenges and physical demands. At a nearby table, a group of young Marines were engaged in animated conversation about their weekend plans. Sarah could hear fragments of their discussion about local bars, upcoming dates, and complaints about their commanding officers. She smiled slightly, remembering her own younger days when such concerns seemed important. Now, her focus was entirely on excellence in service and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the cafeteria shifted. A tall, muscular SEAL named Petty Officer First Class Jake Rodriguez walked in with his usual swagger. Jake was known throughout the base for his impressive combat record, his competitive nature, and unfortunately, his tendency to make inappropriate jokes. At 32, he had served multiple tours overseas and earned several commendations, but his attitude toward women in the military remained stuck in the past. Jake spotted Sarah immediately and nudged his companions, a group of male SEALs who often followed his lead in social situations. They approached the serving line, but Jake's attention remained fixed on Sarah's table. He whispered something to his friends that caused them to chuckle and glance in her direction. Sarah noticed the attention but continued eating, having learned long ago that acknowledging such behavior often made it worse. After getting their food, Jake and his group deliberately chose a table directly adjacent to Sarah's. The positioning was clearly intentional, designed to intimidate or provoke a reaction. Jake sat with his back partially turned toward Sarah, speaking loudly enough for her to hear every word of his conversation. The topic quickly turned to recent training exercises and combat readiness assessments. Jake began sharing stories about his latest missions, embellishing details to make himself sound more heroic than the official report suggested. His friends listened with a mixture of genuine interest and obligatory respect for his higher rank and experience. Then Jake's tone shifted, becoming more pointed and deliberately provocative. He started discussing the changing nature of the military and how standards had supposedly been lowered to accommodate diversity initiatives. His comments were carefully worded to avoid direct insubordination, but the implications were clear to everyone within earshot. Sarah continued eating steadily, her expression remaining neutral despite the growing tension. She had faced similar situations countless times throughout her career and had developed an almost supernatural ability to maintain composure under pressure. Her training had taught her that emotional reactions were often exactly what antagonists wanted to achieve. The cafeteria's background noise seemed to diminish as more people became aware of the brewing confrontation. Conversations at nearby tables grew quieter, and several service members glanced nervously between Jake's table and Sarah's. The situation was escalating, but Sarah remained focused on her breakfast, appearing completely unaffected by the mounting pressure. Jake's comments became increasingly specific and personal. He began discussing recent training exercises where female participants had allegedly struggled with physical requirements. His voice carried across the cafeteria as he questioned whether certain individuals truly belonged in elite combat units. Every word was calculated to provoke Sarah into responding defensively. Other service members in the cafeteria began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Many recognized Jake's behavior as inappropriate and potentially career-threatening, but military hierarchy and social dynamics made intervention complicated. Younger soldiers looked to their superiors for guidance, while senior personnel weighed the risks of getting involved in what could become a formal disciplinary matter. Sarah finished her eggs and took a deliberate sip of coffee, her movements remaining calm and controlled. She understood that Jake was testing her, trying to provoke an emotional response that would validate his prejudices and potentially damage her reputation. Years of similar challenges had taught her the importance of choosing her battles carefully. The tension reached a breaking point when Jake turned slightly toward Sarah's table and made a comment about how some people receive promotions based on politics rather than merit. His words hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon, impossible to ignore and clearly directed at her personally. The entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how Sarah would respond. Several service members at nearby tables stopped eating entirely, their attention focused on the unfolding drama. A few senior officers present recognized the potential for this situation to escalate into a serious incident that could affect multiple careers and damage unit cohesion. The atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation. Sarah set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision, the small sound echoing in the suddenly quiet space around her table. She turned slightly toward Jake, her blue eyes meeting his dark ones with unwavering confidence. The moment had arrived when silence was no longer an option, and her response would determine how this confrontation would be remembered by everyone present. Sarah stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. Every eye in the cafeteria tracked her motion as she walked the few steps to Jake's table. Her footsteps were silent on the polished floor, a testament to years of stealth training. When she reached his table, she didn't sit down or raise her voice. Instead, she simply stood at attention, her posture perfect and her expression serene. Jake looked up at her with a smirk, clearly expecting an emotional outburst or defensive argument. His friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing that their leader might have pushed too far this time. The confidence that had fueled Jake's provocative comments began to waver as he met Sarah's steady gaze. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and carried easily across the now silent cafeteria. She didn't shout or show any signs of anger. Instead, she delivered her words with the precision of a sniper taking a carefully aimed shot. Petty Officer Rodriguez, she began, using his formal title with perfect military courtesy, I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about military standards and qualifications. Since you seem interested in discussing credentials, perhaps you'd like to compare our records. Jake's smirk faltered slightly, but he tried to maintain his bravado. Sure, Lieutenant. I'd be happy to discuss qualifications. Sarah nodded once, then began speaking in the same calm tone. I graduated first in my class from SEAL training, with the highest scores recorded in the program's history for marksmanship, underwater demolition, and tactical planning. My Hell Week time was 47 minutes faster than the previous record, which I believe you held for 3 years. The cafeteria remained absolutely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to listen. Jake's face began to show the first signs of uncertainty as Sarah continued. During my first deployment in Afghanistan, I led 17 successful missions with 0 casualties among my team members. I was awarded the Navy Cross for actions during Operation Desert Shield, where I single-handedly neutralized 3 enemy combatants who had our unit pinned down. The citation specifically mentioned my ability to maintain tactical superiority while protecting wounded teammates. Jake's friends were now staring at their food, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. The Marines at nearby tables had stopped pretending to eat and were openly watching the exchange. Several senior officers had quietly positioned themselves where they could intervene if necessary, but Sarah's professional demeanor made intervention unlikely. Sarah paused for exactly 3 seconds, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. My second deployment included participation in 12 high-value target missions, all of which were completed successfully. I speak 4 languages fluently, hold advanced certifications in explosives handling, and have completed specialized training in hostage rescue operations. The color was beginning to drain from Jake's face as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Sarah wasn't just any female officer who had somehow earned her position through political correctness. She was genuinely one of the most decorated and capable SEALs in the entire program. My physical fitness scores consistently rank in the top 5% of all active SEALs, regardless of gender. Last month's combat readiness assessment placed me first overall in our unit for tactical decision-making under pressure. I've successfully completed every advanced training program offered to SEALs, including several that you haven't yet qualified for. A few suppressed gasps could be heard from nearby tables as the full scope of Sarah's achievements became clear. Jake was no longer smirking. His jaw was clenched, and his hands were gripping his coffee cup so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. Sarah's voice remained perfectly even as she continued. I've saved the lives of 18 fellow service members during combat operations. 3 of those rescues occurred during missions where I was the ranking officer and had to make split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for my team. She paused again, this time for 5 seconds, allowing the weight of her words to fully register with everyone in the cafeteria. The silence was so complete that the distant sound of helicopters on the training field could be clearly heard through the windows. Now, Petty Officer Rodriguez, regarding your suggestion that some people receive promotions based on politics rather than merit, would you like to share your own record for comparison? I'm particularly interested in your Hell Week completion time, your marksmanship scores, and the number of successful missions you've led as the primary decision-maker. Jake's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He had been completely outmaneuvered, not through aggression or confrontation, but through calm presentation of undeniable facts. Every person in the cafeteria understood that Sarah had just delivered one of the most devastating rebuttals they had ever witnessed. The silence stretched on as Jake struggled to find any response that wouldn't make his situation worse. His friends were studying their breakfast trays with intense concentration, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Several younger service members were barely suppressing smiles as they watched the bully receive his comeuppance. Finally, Jake managed to mumble, That's an impressive record, Lieutenant." Sarah nodded once, acknowledging his admission. "Thank you, Petty Officer. I worked very hard to earn my position and my rank. Every day, I continue working hard to prove that I deserve both." She turned slightly to address the entire cafeteria, her voice still calm but now carrying a note of authority that commanded absolute attention. Excellence in military service isn't determined by gender, background, or personal connections. It's measured by dedication, performance, and the willingness to sacrifice for your teammates and your mission. Anyone who has earned the right to wear this uniform deserves respect based on their actions and achievements. A few heads nodded in agreement around the cafeteria. The message was clear and undeniable. Sarah had not only defended herself but had also delivered a lesson about military values that would be remembered long after this incident. Sarah returned to Jake's table and spoke directly to him one final time. "I hope this conversation has been educational for you, Petty Officer Rodriguez. If you ever have questions about qualifications or standards in the future, I encourage you to review official records rather than making assumptions based on personal prejudices." Jake could only nod weakly in response. His reputation as the alpha male of his group had been completely shattered, not through violence or aggression, but through the simple presentation of facts by someone whose achievements far exceeded his own. Sarah walked back to her own table, finished her coffee in 2 calm sips, and picked up her tray. As she headed toward the dish return area, the cafeteria slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed, but they were more subdued than before. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something significant. When Sarah left the cafeteria, her posture was exactly the same as when she had entered, confident, professional, and completely composed. Behind her, Jake sat staring at his untouched breakfast while his friends struggled to process what had just happened. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the base. By the end of the day, Sarah's calm and professional handling of Jake's provocation had become legendary. The story was retold countless times, always emphasizing how she had maintained her dignity while completely dismantling her antagonist's position. Jake's behavior changed dramatically after that day. He never again made inappropriate comments about women in the military, and he actually became one of Sarah's most respectful colleagues. The incident had taught him a valuable lesson about assumptions and the danger of underestimating people based on superficial characteristics. For Sarah, it was simply another day in her military career. She had faced down enemy combatants in foreign countries and hostile attitudes from some colleagues at home with the same calm professionalism. Her response in the cafeteria that day became a perfect example of how true strength is demonstrated not through aggression, but through confidence, competence, and unshakable composure under pressure. Years later, when young female recruits asked Sarah for advice about handling discrimination and harassment, she would always tell them the same thing: let your actions speak for themselves, know your worth, and never let someone else's ignorance define your value. The truth is always the most powerful weapon you possess.